Hello, Norfolk and Nottinghamshire class. This is your Destination Reader lesson for today. This is the 13th lesson of 20 lessons, the BFG by Roald Dahl. Okay, so just a reminder, the key words, important words, will be written in red. Any questions for you to answer will be written in blue, and any writing time will be written in green. Before you begin, I want you to check that you're all organised for the lesson today. You'll need to have a copy of the story, strategy prompt sheet, and a pencil or pen and a piece of paper or your home learning book. I want you to make sure you've got all those things together, then press play and continue. Press pause now. Okay, the BFG by Roald Dahl. So we are going to continue with strategy number 3, inference. What does inference mean? And why do good readers make inferences? I want you to have a little think about what 2 things we add together to come up with that inference, and then a sentence about why do good readers make inferences. What does inference mean? What plus what equals an inference? And why do good readers make inferences? Press pause now. Okay, fantastic. So, what plus what makes an inference? You should have said that the text clues or the clues that the author has left, plus your background knowledge, your schema, and you'll come up with an inference. And why do good readers make inferences? Well, it makes the reading better to understand, and it makes it more interesting. And yesterday, we made an inference, and we had to use our background knowledge on fairy tales. Remember when we were thinking about Jack and the Beanstalk? You had to use your background knowledge to work out that question. Okay, so our vocabulary. My turn. Patience. Your turn. My turn, patience. Your turn. So patience is the ability to put up with trouble without getting angry or upset. So if something horrible is happening, you're very calm and you can not get upset and not get angry about it. You're showing patience. My turn. To be overcome by something. Your turn. My turn. To be overcome by something. Your turn. Okay, so if you're overcome by something, you're speechless, you're overwhelmed, you can't talk, something is so incredible, you've got nothing to say, you've been overcome by something. My turn, gravely. Your turn. My turn, gravely. Your turn. So gravely is if something is very serious or important, it's causing great concern. If you speak in a grave tone, you are talking in a very serious tone, gravely. Okay, so we're going to continue with 1 mark and 2 mark answers. Now, I wonder if you remember how we say this. My turn. 1 mark questions need a short, snappy answer. Your turn. My turn. 1 mark questions need a short, snappy answer. Your turn. Fantastic. Okay, how about 2 mark questions? My turn. 2 mark questions need a PE answer. Your turn. My turn. 2 mark questions need a PE answer. Your turn. Okay, so PE answer is the point, is the P. This is the main idea. It's what you want to talk about. And then the E is the evidence. You've backed it up. You've justified it. You've found your answer from the text. And you are using that as an example. It's a PE answer. Okay, I want you to get your books out. We're going to be going to page 89. And this chapter is called Dreams, and we've just been learning about or finding out about the BFG, and he has gone dream catching and he got a troggle humper. And do you remember what he did with the troggle humper? That's right, he put it down the flesh lump eater's ears, and then all the giants had a big fight and they were really frightened of Jack from Jack and the Beanstalk, and that did make Sophie smile. So that's where we're up to. We're going to continue learning a bit more about the dreams. So I'm going to read and I want you to follow along, and then we're going to stop at some points and ask some questions. So you should have your book open and follow along as I read. The big friendly giant was seated at the great table in his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby, watching him at work. The glass jar containing the one and only good dream they had caught that day stood between them. The BFG, with great care and patience, was printing something on a piece of paper with an enormous pencil. "What are you writing?" Sophie asked him. "Every dream is having a special label on the bottle," the BFG said. "How else could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry?" But can you really and truly tell what sort of dream it's going to be simply by listening to it?" Sophie asked. "I can," the BFG said, not looking up. "But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes?" "You is less or more right," the BFG said. "Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzzing hum music, and these grand swashbuckling ears of mine is able to read that music." "By music, do you mean tunes?" "I is not meaning tunes." "Then what do you mean?" "Human beings is having their own music, right or left." "Right," said Sophie. "Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome when they is hearing wondrous music. They is getting shivers right down their spindles, right or left." "Right," said Sophie. "So the music is saying something to them. It is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what the message is, but they is loving it just the same." "That's about right," Sophie said. "Just because of these jump-squiffling ears of mine," the BFG said, "I is not only able to hear the music that dreams is making, but I is understanding it also." "What do you mean, understanding it?" Sophie said. "I can read it," the BFG said. "It talks to me. It is like a language." "I find that just a little hard to believe," Sophie said. "I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe in quogwinkles," the BFG said, "and how they is visiting us from the stars." "Of course I don't believe that," Sophie said. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. "I hope you will forgive me," he said, "but if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not. They is nearly all of them not muches and squeak pips." "I beg your pardon," Sophie said. "The matter with human beings," the BFG went on, "is that they is absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they is actually seeing it right in front of their own schnoozles. Of course, quogwinkles is existing. I is meeting them oftenly. I is even chittering to them." He turned away contemptuously from Sophie and resumed his writing. Sophie moved over to read what he had written so far. The letters were printed big and bold, but were not very well formed. Here is what it said. "This dream is about how I is saving my teacher from drowning. I is diving into the river from a high bridge, and I is dragging my teacher to the bank, and then I is giving him the kiss of death." "The kiss of what?" Sophie asked. The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. "I is telling you once before," he said quietly, "that I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. They is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, Sophie. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly Miss Know Everything yourself." I'm sorry, Sophie said, I really am. It is very rude of me to keep correcting you. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer. Then he bent his head again to his slow, laborious writing. Tell me honestly, Sophie said, if you blew this dream into my bedroom when I was asleep, would I really and truly start dreaming about how I've saved my teacher from drowning by diving off the bridge? More, the BFG said, a lot more, but I cannot be scribbling the whole flunking dream on a titchy piece of paper. Of course there is more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one mass of air close to the jar. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said, nodding his great head solemnly up and down. This dream is continuing very nice. It has a very dory-hunky ending. How does it end? Sophie said, please tell me. You would be dreaming, the BFG said, that the morning after you was saving the teacher from the river, you was arriving at school and you was seeing all the 500 people sitting there in the assembly hall and all the teachers as well, and the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I is wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and is saving the life of our fine arithmetic teacher, Mr. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Upscotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie. And the whole school is then cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done, and forever after that, even when you was getting your sums all gung swizzled and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing, good work, Sophie, in your exercise book. Then you is waking up. I like that dream, Sophie said. We're going to stop there. I've got a question. Why do you think Sophie likes that dream? This is a 2-mark question. It needs point and evidence. Why do you think Sophie likes that dream? I want you to listen while I think aloud. Well, I think that Sophie likes that dream because it has a happy ending and all the school are cheering for Sophie. I think this because in the text it says that the whole school is cheering like mad and shouting, bravo, well done. And so I've got my evidence from the text and it backs up my point. I want you to have a think about your answer. Say your answer out loud, then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper in your home learning book. Why do you think Sophie likes that dream? Press pause now. Okay, you're back. Well done. Fantastic. We're going to keep reading. Follow along. We're about halfway down on page 93. Of course you like it, the BFG said. It's a fizz wizard. He licked the back of the label and stuck it on the jar. I is usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, he said, but you was watching me and making me jumpsy. I'll go and sit somewhere else, Sophie said. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you will be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of colour in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering and very beautiful. There it lay, this small oblong sea green jellyish thing, at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful, but pulsing gently, the whole of it moving in and out ever so slightly as though it were breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It is not needing any food, the BFG told her. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs some sort of food, even trees and plants. The north wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on the ends, and nobody is feeding it. Sophie was silent. This extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be lending her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. It is good one. It is waiting peacefully forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. "Please, can I see some of the other dreams?" Sophie asked him. The BFG hesitated. "Nobody has ever seen them before," he said, "but perhaps, after all, I is letting you have a little peep." He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of one of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. "Over here is some of the good dreams," he said. "The Fizz Wizards." Okay, we're going to stop there. I've got a question. Why do you think that the BFG doesn't usually show people the dreams? This is a 2-mark question. It needs a PE answer. I want you to have a little think and say your answer out loud, then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper or in your home learning book. Why do you think the BFG doesn't usually show people the dreams? Press pause now. Okay, great. Let's have a look at what I put. I said that I think the BFG doesn't usually show people the dreams because he lives alone and doesn't have any friends or family to show them to. I think this because in the previous chapter we learned that the BFG lives in his cave by himself. He is not friends with the other giants as they bully him. The other giants would probably destroy the dreams if the BFG showed them. That's what I put. Is it similar to your ideas? Okay, we're going to keep reading. Follow along and we'll stop at our next point. We're down the bottom of page 94. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels?" Sophie said. "My labels is only telling bits of it," the BFG said. "The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me." Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right round the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. "Today I is sitting in class and I discover that if I is staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her. In the end, her head drops onto her desk and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher and he shouts, 'Wake up, Miss Plumridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? Go fetch your hat and coat and leave the school forever. You is sacked.' But in a jiffy, I is putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumridge. And then I is hearing my mummy's voice saying, 'Wake up, your breakfast is ready.'" "Oh, what a funny dream," Sophie said. "It's a ring bella," the BFG said. "It's a whoopsie." Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a trifle larger. "Do you have separate dreams for boys and for girls?" Sophie asked. "Of course," the BFG said. "If I is giving a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was a real whoopsie girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking what a rot-bungling, sludging old dream that was." "Boys would," Sophie said. "These here is all girls' dreams on this shelf," the BFG said. "Can I read a boy's dream?" "You can," the BFG said, and he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as followed. "I is making myself a marvellous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in and she is starting to yell at me as she always does, yelling, 'What on earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling?' And I looks down at her and I smile and I says, 'I told you, you was driving me up the wall and now you has done it.'" "Oh, I find that one rather silly," Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another ring, Bella. Perhaps you has seen enough now." "Let me read another boy's one," Sophie said. The next label said, The telephone rings in our house and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephone voice, "Simpkins speaking." Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny and he says, "What? Who?" And then he says, "Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it is me you is wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son." My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has had a lobster stuck in his throat, and then at last he is saying, "Yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir." And he turns to me and he says in a rather respectable voice, "Is you knowing the President of the United States?" And I says, "No, but I is expecting he is hearing about me." Then is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, "Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way." And my father's eyes is goggling right out of his head, and that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, "Get up, you lazy slob, or you will be late for school." Boys are crazy. Sophie said, "Let me read this next one." Sophie started reading the next label. I is having a bath and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is no longer there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, "Where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago and he can't possibly have washed himself properly." So I says, "Here I is." And she says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And she says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And she yells, "Henry, come up quick." And when my daddy rushes in, I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the ear. But, of course, he's not seeing me, and he shouts, "Where are you, boy?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I says, "Here." And he says, "The soap, boy, the soap, it's flying in the air." Then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement, and he says, "You is the invisible boy." And I says, I is going to have some fun." So when I is out of the bath and I have dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there is a panic, with everybody yelling, "A ghost, a ghost," and people is screaming left and right, and big, strong policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and I say, "Boo." And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I is walking up and feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. Pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. "Dreams is a very mystical thing," the BFG said. "Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Have you seen enough?" "Just this last one," Sophie said. "This one here." She started reading. I has written a book, and it is so exciting, nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you are so hooked on it you cannot stop until the last page. And all the city's people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book. And dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down, and so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer in the world has ever known, until my mummy comes in and says, I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really your spelling is atrocious, so is your punctuation. That's enough for me for now, the BFG said. There is dillions more, but my arm is getting tired of holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I is catching so many dreams I is not having the time or energy to write out long labels, but there is enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my pussycat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG, I has been wondering how long it is before you is asking me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvellous. Sophie said, how did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny secret door in the wall. He took out a book, very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hand. One night, he said, I is blowing a dream through a window, and I sees this book lying on the little boy's bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly, you understand, but I is refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? Sophie asked. I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps only about 80 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall be putting it back. And we're going to stop here. Here's my question. Do you think the boy will want his book back? Why? I want you to have a little think and say your answer out loud. Then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper. Do you think the boy will want his book back? Why? Press pause now. Okay, great. So, I wanted to know, do you think the boy will want his book back? And why do you think this? Well, I've said that I think the boy won't want his book back because he would be a very old man by now. And I think it's because the BFG tells Sophie that he has had the book for at least 80 years. So if he's had the book for 80 years and that boy was 8 years old, he'd now be an 88-year-old man. So I don't think he'll want that book back. Okay, let's carry on and finish reading the chapter. And that's how you taught yourself to write, Sophie asked him. I is reading it hundreds of times, the BFG said, and I is reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to read them. It is the most scrumdiddlyumptious story. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud. By Dale's Chickens, the BFG said. By who? Sophie said. Just then there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet from the outside cave. What's that? Sophie cried. That is all the giants are fizzling off to another country to guzzle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past at full gallop. Where is you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all flush bunking off to England tonight, answered the Flish Lumpeter as they went galloping past. England is a luxurious land, and we is fancying a few nice little English chidlers. I, shouted the maid Masher, I is knowing where there is a giggle house for girls, and I is guzzling myself full as a froth blower. And I knows where there is a boggle box for boys, shouted the Gizzard Gumpler, and I has to do is reach and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra liquishy. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of the pocket. What is a giggle house for girls? He is meaning a girls' school, the BFG said. He will be eating them by the bundle. Oh, no, cried Sophie. And boys from a boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's not a thing we can do, the BFG said. We as helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is now quite safe for you to be outside until they is coming back, he said. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and it was getting dark. Okay, so we're going to have a look at our final question. Why is Sophie upset at the end of this chapter? It's a 2-mark question. It needs a point and an evidence. Have a little think, say your answer out loud, then make a note of your ideas on your piece of paper in your home learning book. Why is Sophie upset at the end of this chapter? Press pause now. Okay, let's have a look at what I wrote. I said, I think that Sophie is upset at the end of this chapter because the giants are going to England to eat lots of boys and girls and boys. I think this because the Flish Lumpeter tells the BFG that they're going to England to eat English chidlers, and that chidlers is how they say children. Okay, is that similar to what you put? Fantastic. So we have come to the end of today's lesson. Tomorrow we're going to continue reading the BFG and we're going to carry on making inferences on your home learning book or piece of paper. You could make a prediction about what you think is going to happen next in the story. Do you think that the giants are going to go to England and eat the children? Let's have a little think and write your prediction down, and we'll continue reading tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye.